Okay, let's unpack this because looking through the foundational text for today's deep dive specifically, Chapter 8, focusing on human health and disease, it becomes incredibly clear that for centuries, humanity had the basic mechanics of our own survival entirely backwards.
That is exactly the right conceptual lens to start with.
Right. I mean, we are looking at a critical transition point in the biology curriculum today for everyone listening. We aren't just memorizing definitions here.
No, definitely not. We're looking at a fundamental rewiring of how you need to view the human organism.
Exactly. And the core essence I took away from mapping this out, like my massive light bulb moment, is that health is not this static state. It is a dynamic, highly volatile, and intensely interconnected ecosystem.
It involves your mental state, your physical biology, and your social environment all at once.
All at once. I was mapping out a way to visualize this for anyone studying this material, and I keep coming back to the analogy of a highly complex biological smart home.
Oh, I like that. A smart home.
Yeah, because we need to stop thinking of the human body as this simple mechanical engine that is either just running or broken. Instead, think of a fully integrated system.
Where everything talks to everything else.
Exactly. So if the internal Wi-Fi network, which represents the neural system, experiences a glitch, or if the main power grid, the endocrine system, starts surging and sending erratic signals,
Then the internal security system fails.
the immunity fails. And the moment that security system goes offline, the doors are essentially unlocked for any external or internal intruder.
The smart home analogy is a brilliant framework because it highlights interdependence. And that is the absolute crux of modern physiology.
It really is.
And to set the explicit mission for you, the listener, as we navigate this deep dive today, we are tracing the evolutionary timeline of human medical understanding.
From the ancient stuff to the modern lab.
Precisely. We are going to isolate exactly how everything from your baseline genetics to your microscopic daily habits dictates your biological survival.
And for anyone listening who is preparing for high-stakes competitive exams,
especially in the medical field like Neet.
Right, this topic exists to bridge the gap between abstract anatomy and real-world pathology.
We are going to map out the high-yield concepts,
the
hidden connections, and the specific traps examiners use, so you have this permanently hardwired into your understanding.
Hardwired. I love that. So building that mental map requires us to start at the foundational baseline, which means looking at the past.
The ancient past.
Yeah, the curriculum specifically points out the starting point of our historical understanding. It highlights that for a remarkably long period of human history, health was considered a state of body and mind characterized by a balance of certain humors.
The good humor hypothesis.
Yes, the good humor hypothesis.
Which was the dominant medical paradigm for millennia. And it's crucial for you to understand who was propagating this theory.
Right, because the curriculum deliberately names two distinct historical sources here.
It does. It cites the early Greeks, specifically Hippocrates, and the Indian Ayurveda system of medicine.
It is genuinely fascinating to me that two completely distinct geographical and cultural centers arrived at the exact same completely flawed medical consensus.
Well, looking at their methodology, it makes sense.
Yeah, the material points out that this entire system was constructed through pure reflective thought.
Pure reflective thought, which means no microscopes.
No clinical trials, no hematology labs, just early philosophers and healers observing the natural world.
Seeing earth, water, fire, and air.
Right, and intuitively deciding that the human body must be governed by a similar interplay of elements or fluids.
It was an attempt to impose philosophical order onto biological chaos. Observation and logic were their only available tools.
But this brings us to the first major conceptual trap for a learner, particularly in a testing environment.
Yes, the black bile trap.
The text highlights a very specific example of this humor theory, the concept of black bile. The historical belief was that persons possessing black bile belonged to a
hot personality and would inevitably suffer from fevers.
Right. Hot personality and fevers. And this is exactly where an examiner will test your reliance on intuition versus your actual mastery of the text.
Think about the linguistic association of the word black bile. Intuitively, a student's brain associates black or bile or melancholy with something cold.
Cold, dark, sluggish, depressive.
Exactly.
If I'm just guessing based on the prefix, I would assume a black bile patient is freezing and lethargic. But the curriculum explicitly links black bile to a hot personality and fevers.
And in a high-pressure multiple-choice scenario, An examiner will exploit that intuitive bias.
They totally will.
They'll present a question asking you to identify the clinical manifestation of black bile according to ancient medicine. The distractors will be heavily weighted toward cold sweats, low temperature, or sluggish behavior.
And if you haven't explicitly anchored this counterintuitive fact, your brain will betray you.
You must memorize the exact pairing provided. Black bile equates to a hot personality and fevers.
And furthermore, you have to remember the dual origin of this theory.
Oh, the assertion reasoning trap.
Yes. Because assertion reasoning questions frequently try to trick students into assigning the good humor hypothesis exclusively to Western medicine or exclusively to Eastern medicine.
You must recognize that both Hippocrates and the Indian Ayurvedic system champion this exact view.
Okay, so that dual consensus is a great detail to lock in. We have this ancient established world order governed by theoretical humors.
A fever is just an excess of black bile.
Right, and this entire global medical infrastructure is held up by philosophers basically just thinking deeply about the universe.
And that is the paradigm.
But then we cross the threshold into the scientific revolution, and the catalyst for the destruction of this ancient theory is almost shockingly simple.
It is one of the most elegant paradigm shifts in the history of science.
The entire global consensus of the good humor hypothesis was systematically dismantled by one individual utilizing something as basic as the thermometer.
William Harvey.
Enter William Harvey. The material credits him with the discovery of blood circulation, which is obviously a monumental milestone. But what is far more critical for the narrative of human health here is his application of the experimental method.
This is the exact inflection point where biology ceases to be a speculative art and becomes a rigorous, hard science.
We completely abandon pure reflective thought.
And we adopt empirical data.
The methodology Harvey used is brilliant in its simplicity. He took individuals who supposedly suffered from an excess of this black bile.
The patients who are defined by their hot personalities and fevers.
Right. He took them and applied the experimental method by taking a thermometer and actually measuring their temperature.
And what did he find?
He demonstrated that these individuals had a completely normal body temperature.
He generated objective data that directly contradicted the foundational premise of the humor theory.
Effectively destroying it overnight.
It is the ultimate triumph of empirical evidence over entrenched dogma. He proved that you cannot deduce internal physiology based on external personality traits.
It's an amazing story. However, the way this is tested is notoriously tricky.
Very tricky.
William Harvey is a towering figure, but the curriculum fuses his achievements into a single, highly concentrated paragraph. How does that translate into an exam trap?
The trap lies in the separation of facts. The text credits Harvey with two distinct monumental achievements.
Okay.
First, the discovery of blood circulation, and second, the disproving of the good humor hypothesis through the experimental method using a thermometer.
Right, those are two separate things.
But because the discovery of blood circulation is such a famous milestone, students often hyperfocus on it. They associate Harvey exclusively with the cardiovascular system.
Oh, I see.
Examiners know this. They will construct a question asking, which scientist is responsible for disproving the good humor hypothesis?
And they'll throw in other names.
They will include distractors like Louis Pasteur, Robert Koch, or even Hippocrates. A student rushing through the exam might bypass Harvey thinking, no, Harvey is the circulation guy, not the humor guy.
That is a phenomenal strategic insight. You can't let them compartmentalize his achievements.
You must build a comprehensive mental map. William Harvey is the architect of blood circulation, Andy the executioner of the humor theory.
Those two facts are inextricably linked. Okay, so Harvey and his thermometer shatter the ancient world. We enter an era of experimental medicine. We understand that blood circulates, and we demand empirical proof.
And this evolutionary leap brings us directly into the modern paradigm.
And looking at the biological mechanics described next, we hit a genuinely profound realization about how the human machine operates. The mind-body connection.
Yes, we arrive at the biological reality of the mind-body highway.
The curriculum establishes a definitive, undeniable biological chain of command. It states unequivocally that the mind influences the immune system.
And it achieves this influence through two highly specific anatomical pathways.
The neural system and the endocrine system.
Exactly.
The logical conclusion presented is that because the immune system is responsible for maintaining our health, our mind and our mental state have a direct, measurable capacity to alter our physical health.
It is difficult to overstate how significant this concept is, medically and conceptually.
Right, because for a long time, the idea of a mind-body connection was relegated to the fringes of alternative wellness.
It was viewed as slightly pseudoscientific woo-woo stuff.
But what this curriculum does is drag that concept into the harsh light of hard, verifiable biology. It provides the actual wiring diagram.
It confirms that your thoughts, your perceived stress, your emotional state, these aren't just abstract concepts floating in the ether.
They have physical levers they can pull inside your cellular architecture.
Let's construct a very clear sequential flowchart for the listener to visualize right now, because understanding the precise mechanism of action here is vital.
Okay, let's map it.
At the absolute top of the hierarchy, you have the mind. The mind generates a state. Let's use stress as an example.
Okay, stress.
But the mind itself cannot directly neutralize a pathogen or alter a white blood cell. It requires communication infrastructure.
It needs wires.
It utilizes two distinct systems. First, the neural system. Returning to your smart home analogy, this is the hardwired, high-speed electrical grid.
It relies on action potentials and neurotransmitters.
It is instantaneous.
It's the fiber optic network of the body. Immediate signal transmission.
Exactly. The second pathway is the endocrine system. This is the chemical messenger service. It utilizes hormones like cortisol or adrenaline secreted into the bloodstream.
And thanks to William Harvey, we understand exactly how that blood circulates those messengers throughout the entire system.
So the mind utilizes the high-speed electrical wires of the neural system and the slower, pervasive chemical messengers of the endocrine system to broadcast its commands.
And the target of those commands is the immune system, the defense force.
Precisely. The neural and endocrine systems interface directly with the immune system. They can upregulate or downregulate immune function.
And finally, the text establishes the ultimate dependency. It is the immune system that maintains overall health.
So the required mental map is a strictly linear pathway. You need to visualize this.
Mind to neural and endocrine to immune to health.
That is the cascade.
It is a stunningly elegant cascade, and it explains so much about modern pathology. It explains the biological mechanism of why chronic, prolonged stress physically breaks down the body.
It isn't just a feeling of being overwhelmed.
No, the psychological state of stress triggers the neural and endocrine systems to continuously flood the biological smart home with stress hormones.
And those specific hormones actively suppress the production and efficiency of immune cells.
The defense grid drops, and a pathogen that your body would normally neutralize easily is suddenly allowed to take hold and compromise your physical health.
That is the exact clinical reality. It is a measurable, quantifiable chain of biological events.
Mind-blowing.
And from a testing perspective, the examiner's focus will be laser-targeted on the intermediary bridge.
The middle of the flowchart.
Yes. The mind does not directly interact with the immune system. If a multiple-choice question asks you to identify the specific physiological systems that mediate the mind's influence on health, you must identify both the neural system and the endocrine system.
Selecting only one will cost you.
Or selecting an unrelated system like the digestive or respiratory system will cost you the mark. The bridge is strictly neural and endocrine.
That's locked in. So we now possess the modern blueprint. We understand that health is actively maintained by this intricate multi-system collaboration.
But the curriculum then pivots to examine the vulnerabilities of this architecture.
Right. It outlines the specific factors that can disrupt and degrade health. It presents what we can categorize as the three primary pillars of health disruption. Let's dissect these sequentially.
The trifecta of health disruptors.
The first category is genetic disorders, and what I found particularly interesting is how precisely the text defines the temporal nature of these disorders.
The timing is everything here.
It doesn't just say bad DNA, it defines genetic disorders as deficiencies with which a child is born and deficiencies or defects which the child inherits from parents from birth.
That phrasing is intentional and legally precise in a biological sense. It is establishing a strict chronological boundary.
These are not mutations acquired through environmental radiation at age 40.
No, these are foundational flaws baked into the very initial blueprint of the organism. You either possess the genetic anomaly at the moment of conception, or you are born with a deficiency.
It is the internal, pre-programmed vulnerability of the biological smart home, like a structural defect in the concrete before the house is even built.
Exactly. Now, the second category shifts from the internal to the external.
It is simply listed as infection.
These represent the hostile external environment, the bacteria, the viruses, the pathogenic fungi, the parasites.
The active invaders constantly probing the perimeter of the immune system's security grid, looking for a vulnerability to exploit.
Which brings us to the third category. And this is arguably the most nuanced and the most actionable factor.
Lifestyle.
Yes.
The curriculum doesn't just drop the word lifestyle as a vague catch-all. It explicitly defines the parameters.
It does.
It includes the food and water we consume, the rest and exercise we provide our bodies, and critically, it includes habits that we have or lack.
This third pillar, lifestyle, is the site of one of the most common and devastating categorization traps in competitive exams. I need every listener to pay extremely close attention to how this is structured.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of this trap. How does an examiner weaponize this list?
When an exam questions you on the factors affecting health according to the foundational text, the macro categories are strictly genetics, infections, and lifestyle.
Just those three.
The trap occurs when examiners dismantle the lifestyle category and use its subcomponents as distractors, or try to trick you into creating a fourth, non-existent category.
So, for example, they might present a question asking which of the following is a primary factor affecting health, and list genetics, infections, water intake, and rest.
Exactly. A student might look at water intake or rest and think, well, the text mentioned those, so they must be primary categories.
But they aren't.
No, they are subcomponents of lifestyle.
Right.
But the most insidious part of the trap lies in the phrase, habits that we have or lack. Examiners love to test the concept of omission.
The idea that not doing something is an active lifestyle factor.
Precisely. A student easily categorizes chain smoking as a bad habit under lifestyle. But what about a chronic lack of a consistent sleep schedule?
Or lack of basic dental hygiene.
A common error is assuming that the absence of a habit doesn't fit into a structured category. The curriculum explicitly states that the lack of a habit is a defining characteristic of your lifestyle.
So if a question asks, according to the biological definition, a lack of disciplinary hygiene falls under which category of health disruption?
You must definitively select lifestyle. It is not an infection, and it is not a genetic disorder inherited at birth. You must respect the exact taxonomy the text provides.
That is a crucial distinction. The absence of a positive action is functionally identical to the presence of a negative action within the lifestyle category.
It all goes under lifestyle.
So we've traced the history, we've mapped the neural endocrine immune highway, we've categorized the three disruptors, genetics, infections, and lifestyle.
And this massive accumulation of data naturally funnels down to a single profound question.
The curriculum literally poses it to the reader. The term health is very frequently used by everybody. How do we define it?
This is the moment the text forces the student to abandon colloquial language and adopt clinical precision.
It begins by stripping away the misconceptions. It explicitly rejects the common everyday definition. It states that health cannot be defined simply as the absence of disease or merely as physical fitness.
Which is a direct attack on how 99% of the population uses the word.
Yeah, if you ask a random person on the street if they are healthy, they will typically evaluate two things. Am I currently displaying symptoms of a disease?
Yeah.
And can I walk up a flight of stairs without collapsing?
If the answer is yes, they declare themselves healthy.
The biological curriculum rejects this binary approach entirely. It demands a much more comprehensive view.
It redefines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being.
It transforms health from a flat, two-dimensional checklist into a three-dimensional state of existence: physical, mental, and social.
The three-dimensional model.
I always visualize this as a three-legged stool supporting the human organism. Imagine an Olympic athlete. Their cardiovascular system is pristine, their musculature is optimized. The physical leg of their stool is fundamentally indestructible.
They are physically elite.
Right. However, imagine that same athlete is suffering from profound clinical depression, and they exist in a state of total social isolation with no community support network.
According to the strict biological definition provided in this text, that athlete is not healthy.
The stool cannot stand on one leg. True biological health mandates a state of complete well-being across all three dimensions.
This is perhaps the most critical conceptual hurdle for a student to clear. You have to internalize that health is an active, comprehensive state of total well-being, not merely the passive absence of illness.
And predictably, examiners will ruthlessly target this exact definition using true, false, or statement-based questions.
They will try to slip the colloquial definition past you.
A classic exam assertion will read, according to modern biological understanding, health is accurately defined as a state of physical fitness and the absence of underlying disease.
If a student is skimming, or if they rely on their everyday vocabulary, they will mark that statement as True, it sounds reasonable.
But clinically, it is definitively false.
When evaluating the definition of health, your brain must actively scan for the specific keywords: complete physical, mental, and social well-being.
If the mental or social dimensions are omitted from the provided definition, the statement is incorrect. Complete physical, mental, and social well-being. The triad must be unbroken. Now, what follows this definition in the curriculum is a fascinating shift in perspective. Up to this point, we have been utilizing a microscopic lens looking at humors, neurotransmitters, cellular immunity, and individual lifestyle habits.
But then the text zooms out.
Suddenly, it zooms out to a macroscopic societal level. It begins to describe the ripple effects of a biologically healthy population. It essentially bridges the gap between molecular biology and macroeconomics.
This is where the curriculum demonstrates the real-world scale of biology. It illustrates the societal and economic cascade that occurs when that three-dimensional state of health is achieved across population.
Let's trace the exact sequence of this cascade as the text maps it out. The initial catalyst is simple. When people are healthy, they are more efficient at work.
Which is biologically logical. An organism operating at peak physical, mental, and social well-being is not diverting vital metabolic energy toward fighting off an infection or managing chronic psychological stress.
That conserved energy is instead directed entirely toward external tasks and cognitive function.
The biological efficiency translates directly into operational efficiency.
And the text then states that this increased efficiency leads to increased productivity. The output of the population scales up.
More tasks are accomplished in less time, with a lower error rate.
And the final step in this specific chain. This increased productivity brings economic prosperity.
It is a stunning realization when you truly analyze the implications here. We often separate science and economics into distinct academic silos.
Right, biology is over here, economics is over there.
But this text makes it explicit. A nation's gross domestic product, the strength of its currency, its overall economic prosperity, these are all fundamentally downstream consequences of cellular biology.
You cannot engineer a prosperous, highly productive society on the foundation of a biologically compromised population.
Biology is the ultimate foundational infrastructure of human civilization.
It redefines the stakes entirely. But the cascade doesn't end with mere economic output. The curriculum highlights two additional profound demographic impacts.
First, it states that health increases the longevity of people. It actively extends the average lifespan of the entire population block.
And crucially, it reduces infant and maternal mortality. It prevents the death of babies and mothers during childbirth and early infancy.
From an evolutionary and societal standpoint, these are the ultimate metrics of a successful species: the ability to survive longer and the ability to successfully reproduce without catastrophic loss of life.
The curriculum is placing the entirety of human progress, economic wealth, expanded lifespans, and generational survival squarely on the foundation of that three-dimensional definition of health.
It's a massive shift in scale.
Knowing that the stakes are literally the economic survival and generational continuity of the species, the obvious next question is, how do we maintain this complex machine?
The toolkit.
The text transitions into providing a highly specific toolkit for achieving and maintaining good health. And it is an incredibly dense catalog of requirements packed into a single section.
It is a dense list, and attempting to memorize it as a single, continuous string of words is a terrible strategy for a learner. The human brain struggles with unstructured lists.
So what's the optimal approach?
The optimal approach is to synthesize this information by dividing the text requirements into logical, functional categories. Let's build that structural framework right now.
Okay, reviewing the text, the first logical grouping I can extract relates to individual daily actions. Let's label this category personal habits.
Personal habits.
The text explicitly lists a balanced diet, personal hygiene, and regular exercise as fundamental requirements to maintain good health.
That is the perfect baseline. These are the micro-level, controllable inputs that an individual manages daily to stabilize their biological smart home.
Moving to the next item, we encounter something unique. The text specifically highlights an ancient practice. Let's call this category traditional modalities.
It explicitly calls out yoga.
Right, noting that it has been practiced since time immemorial to achieve both physical and mental health.
What is particularly elegant about the inclusion of yoga here is how perfectly it validates the modern definition we just established.
Oh, so?
Look at the specific phrasing. Yoga achieves physical and mental health. An ancient practice, developed millennia before the discovery of the endocrine system, intuitively targeted two of the three critical pillars of the modern 3D definition of health.
Oh, wow. It is a brilliant example of convergent medical evolution. The ancient intuition aligns with the modern biological imperative.
Precisely. Now, transitioning from the internal to the external environment, we hit the next set of requirements.
Let's categorize this as public and community health. The text dictates the necessity of proper disposal of wastes, the control of vectors, specifically noting things like mosquitoes, and the maintenance of hygienic food and water resources.
And this right here is where we must activate a massive warning beacon for any student navigating this material. This specific category is the site of the community health blind spot.
The community health blind spot. Explain the mechanics of this blind spot. Why do students fail here?
The failure stems from the context of the curriculum itself. Students are studying advanced biology. Their minds are saturated with concepts like DNA replication, antibody structures, and cellular respiration.
They are hyper-focused on the internal, microscopic, and molecular aspects of human biology.
Exactly. Consequently, when an exam presents a multiple-choice question, asking them to identify critical prerequisites for maintaining biological health according to the text, they immediately gravitate toward the clinical and the microscopic.
They look for answers containing words like lymphocytes or vaccines.
And they completely overlook the environmental infrastructure. They see an option like proper disposal of wastes or control of vectors, and their brain categorizes it as ecology or civics or environmental science, rather than human biology.
They just dismiss it.
But you cannot maintain the internal sanctity of the biological smart home if the external environment is a toxic swamp swarming with pathogens.
That makes total sense.
The text equates the importance of waste disposal and mosquito control directly with diet and exercise. Community hygiene is the invisible macroscopic shield that makes internal cellular health possible.
So if you ignore the public health requirements in a multiple choice array, you will lose the point.
The garbage truck and the municipal water treatment plant are just as vital to human biology as the syringe and the stethoscope.
That is a phenomenal perspective shift. You have to maintain peripheral vision. Don't get so zoomed in on the cell that you forget the swamp outside.
Which perfectly bridges us to the final functional category in the toolkit.
Medical intervention. The text lists awareness about diseases and their effect on different bodily functions, alongside vaccination or immunization against infectious diseases.
This represents the synergy of knowledge and preventative engineering. You must possess the cognitive awareness of how your systems operate to protect them, and you must actively pre-program your immune system, your biological soldiers, using vaccines to anticipate specific external threats.
So we have exhaustively mapped the concept of health. We understand its history, its biological pathways, its definitions, its economic impacts, and the toolkit required to sustain it.
However, the chapter is titled Human Health AD Disease.
We have to flip the paradigm and examine the pathology. How does the foundational text define the breakdown of the system? What actually constitutes a disease?
The curriculum is incredibly careful here to provide a strict, clinical definition that leaves no room for ambiguity. Let's analyze the exact phrasing provided.
It states, when the functioning of one or more organs or systems of the body is adversely affected, characterized by various signs and symptoms, we say that we are not healthy, i.e., we have a disease.
To master this concept, a learner must dissect that sentence into its three mandatory diagnostic criteria. First, there must be an adverse effect on functioning.
The system cannot merely be operating suboptimally, it must be actively impaired.
Second, this impairment must be localized to one or more organs or systems. It requires a specific anatomical or systemic failure point.
And third, and this is the critical threshold for clinical diagnosis, the impairment must be characterized by various signs and symptoms.
This is a vital distinction in medical terminology that students often gloss over. The difference between a sign and a symptom.
A sign is an objective metric that a physician or a machine can observe and measure, like a quantifiable fever, an elevated white blood cell count, or a visible dermal rash.
While a symptom is a subjective experience reported by the patient, like a feeling of nausea, acute fatigue, or localized pain.
You need both the functional impairment and the observable or felt characteristics to officially cross the diagnostic threshold from a state of being not healthy into the definitive state of having a disease.
Precisely. And once an organism crosses that threshold, the curriculum immediately categorizes the pathology. It takes the near-infinite variety of human ailments and divides them into two massive, overarching classifications.
It is the great divide of pathology. All diseases are categorized into either infectious or non-infectious groups.
Let's establish the parameters for infectious diseases first.
The primary defining characteristic is transmissibility. The text states these are diseases which are easily transmitted from one person to another.
The curriculum also stresses their absolute ubiquity. It explicitly notes that infectious diseases are very common and that every single one of us suffers from these at some time or other.
They are an inescapable reality of existing in a shared biological environment. Returning to our network analogy, an infectious disease is essentially a biological computer virus.
If one node on the network is compromised, the inherent connectivity of the population puts every other node at risk.
But the text doesn't just define them, it highlights the extreme end of the spectrum. It includes a specific, critical detail that I know is a massive focal point for examiners.
Yes, it does.
It emphasizes that while many are common, some infectious diseases are fatal, and it provides a singular, definitive example.
AIDS.
The text states, some of the infectious diseases like AIDS are fatal. It deliberately pairs the concept of a fatal infectious disease with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome.
And that deliberate pairing must become an unbreakable neurological link in your mind as a student.
Why is that one so heavily emphasized?
The pathology of AIDS is uniquely devastating because it directly attacks the very immune system we identified earlier as the ultimate arbiter of health. It doesn't just breach the biological smart home. It systematically disables the security system from the inside.
Now let's pivot across the divide and examine non-infectious diseases. The defining characteristic here is isolation. By definition, these diseases cannot be easily transmitted from person to person.
Continuing the analogy, a non-infectious disease is a hardware failure or a corrupted line of code isolated within a single specific machine.
It poses no communicable threat to the broader network, but it possesses the capacity to completely destroy the individual unit.
And just as it did with infectious diseases, the text provides a singular defining example for the extreme end of the non-infectious spectrum.
It states unequivocally, among non-infectious diseases, cancer is the major cause of death.
And this brings us to the ultimate high-stakes trap of this introductory section. This is where examiners separate the top-tier students from the rest.
The curriculum has deliberately constructed a contrasting pair of absolute extremes. Break down the mechanics of this trap. How do they weaponize these two examples?
The test evaluates your ability to maintain precise categorical boundaries under pressure. The text establishes two grim realities. AIDS is an infectious disease defined as fatal. Cancer is a non-infectious disease defined as the major cause of death.
Both involve catastrophic mortality. They are both ultimate killers, but they exist on opposite sides of the Great Divide.
Exactly. In the intense, adrenaline-fueled environment of a competitive exam, the human brain attempts to rely on heuristics and quick associations.
If a student sees the words fatal or major cause of death, their brain registers extreme danger, but often scrambles the taxonomy.
An examiner will construct a multiple-choice question stating, according to the foundational text, which of the following is identified as the major cause of death among non-infectious diseases?
Option A will invariably be AIDS. Option B might be cardiovascular disease. Option C will be cancer.
A panicked student associates AIDS with ultimate mortality and selects A, completely ignoring the non-infectious parameter of the question.
That is a brutal trap.
It is entirely preventable if you anchor the associations correctly. You must build a rigid mental matrix. If the prompt mentions fatal and infectious, the answer is AIDS.
If the prompt mentions major cause of death and non-infectious, the answer is cancer.
Transposing those variables is a catastrophic error on test day.
Fatal infectious equates to AIDS. Major non-infectious killer equates to cancer. That matrix is locked in. Finally, functioning almost as an addendum to the non-infectious category, the text introduces one final critical disruptor.
It explicitly notes that drug and alcohol abuse also affect our health adversely.
This inclusion serves as a vital conceptual bridge. It connects the clinical definition of disease back to the behavioral pillars we discussed earlier.
It demonstrates that human behavior, specifically the voluntary ingestion of toxic substances, can artificially and intentionally induce that adverse effect on organs and systems required to diagnose a disease.
Substance abuse systematically damages hepatic function, degrades the neural architecture, and compromises cognitive stability.
It is the deliberate, self-inflicted demolition of the biological smart home,
which creates a perfect circular connection back to our lifestyle disruptor, a lack of positive habits, or the active presence of highly destructive habits like substance abuse systematically fractures the entire three-dimensional structure.
The physical leg rots from toxicity, the mental leg collapses under chemical imbalance, and the social leg isolates the individual.
It is an incredibly cohesive curriculum when you analyze the underlying architecture. It is a continuous, unbroken web.
We move from the ancient Greeks, philosophizing about hot personalities, to William Harvey demanding empirical thermal data,
To the realization that mere thoughts transmit electrical signals to our immune cells.
to the realization that municipal garbage collection dictates human survival.
To the final categorization of the ultimate infectious and non-infectious killers. It is a masterclass in biological systems thinking.
It truly is. This relatively brief introductory section of text contains an astonishing density of foundational truth.
We have traversed an immense amount of conceptual territory today. We've decoded ancient medical history, celebrated the birth of the experimental method, mapped the mind-body neural highway, deconstructed the 3D definition of health, and established the rigid taxonomy of disease.
And with that comprehensive exploration complete, it is time to condense and solidify the mental map. We need to transition from broad understanding to tactical memorization.
The sticky summary.
Yes, I'm going to deliver the rapid-fire sticky summary. These are the absolute non-negotiable anchor points. Here's what you must remember to conquer this material. Lock these 5 points into your active memory immediately. Point 1. Number 1, the Harvey dual achievement. William Harvey utilized the experimental method and a thermometer to discover blood circulation and definitively destroy the good humor black bile hypothesis. Do not allow an examiner to separate these achievements or assign them to different scientists.
Number 2.
Number 2, the mind-body bridge. The mind governs the immune system, but it cannot do so directly. It strictly utilizes 2 mediating systems, the neural system and the endocrine system. The sequence is mind to neural and endocrine to immune to health.
Number 3.
Number 3, the 3D health matrix. Health is definitively not just the absence of disease or baseline physical fitness. It is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. If an exam option omits the mental or social dimensions, it is biologically incorrect.
Number 4.
Number 4, the trifecta of disruption. The macro factors affecting health are genetics, defined strictly as deficiencies born with or inherited at birth. Infections, which are external pathogens, and lifestyle, which explicitly includes the daily habits you possess and the habits you lack.
And finally, number 5.
Number 5, the great pathology divide. Maintain strict categorical boundaries for the ultimate killers. AIDS equals a fatal infectious disease. Cancer equals the major cause of death among non-infectious diseases. Never conflate the 2 categories.
That is the ultimate high-yield tactical summary. If you can internalize those 5 specific anchors, you possess a master-level understanding of this foundational topic. You are insulated against the common exam traps.
But before we conclude this deep dive, we want to shift gears and leave you with a broader, final thought to process on your own.
We always want to encourage extrapolating the curriculum into the real world. Based on the biological mechanisms we've synthesized today, this raises a deeply important question.
A profound question.
We have definitively established, using hard biological facts, that our psychological state has the power to directly dictate our physical immune response through the neural and endocrine pathways.
We know unequivocally that chronic stress suppresses the immune system's ability to defend the body.
We also know, looking at global health data, that we are currently experiencing an unprecedented modern crisis of non-infectious systemic diseases.
So here is the concept to ponder.
Given this undeniable, hardwired biological highway between the mind and the body, how much of the modern world's exploding crisis of physical non-infectious disease is actually just a downstream secondary side effect of our modern chronic crisis of mental and social stress?
If our modern lifestyle is actively sawing off the mental and social legs of that 3-dimensional stool, is it any biological mystery that our physical infrastructure is collapsing?
Thank you for joining us on this exhaustive deep dive into the foundations of human health and disease. We've successfully dismantled the ancient superstitions and reconstructed the harsh, elegant reality of human biology. Keep analyzing the text, keep building those resilient mental maps, and we will see you on the next deep dive. Keep exploring.